I have a couple of announcements. Don't forget that our seminar is October 15th. There has been some news in our newsletter about it, and there will be more information coming about the particulars in the future. The most recent newsletter had the information on the seminar, and you can go on our website and sign up for it already. Our lines and bylines editors are looking for more articles. So please, before the end of the month, before the end of the May, we really need some more articles. They don't have to be long. They could be certain photographs with maybe a small blurb telling how that's related to our Kentucky genealogy or history, some things like that. But we need some more for the next lines and bylines to come out, which will be after June 1st. That's our lines and bylines quarterly. Okay, I'm going to, first of all, just say I've been so excited with the 1950 census being available now. It's the first census that I'm on. So it was exciting and fun to look at it. And the neighbors that I played with as a child were in the family right next to us. And so it was fun to look at. So if you haven't had a chance yet to go ahead and look at the 1950 census, because they're out. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Mel, who's going to talk about some of our other future programs and introduce the speaker.
We've got some fantastic programs coming up. And I want to share just a few of them with you. May the 24th, we've got an interesting program, Bring Out Your Dead. It's about plagues, pandemics, and epidemics, and all of us have had ancestors affected by these things. So you might be very interested in that program. That is a Zoom program, again, like today, presented by Derek Blunt, who's a professor of genealogy and has his own organization called Lost Branches. On Tuesday, June the 7th, we've got a series going on every first Tuesday, conducted by Nancy Robinson, and that is on German research. And they're encouraging anyone who's got German research and wants to learn more about how to find their German ancestors to tune in. You may have a lot of questions. You can contact Nancy in person if you'd like beforehand and say, I'm interested in discussing this about. Her address is Nancy AUG 19. That's her age, is it? Is that her age, Howard? I think Nancy 19 at gmail.com. It has been called the first wave, but now it's getting so involved in many other things. We're just calling it the German Special Interest Group. So if you have a special interest in your German heritage, you'll really enjoy that. And then in June the 14th, we're having our first in-person appearance. We're gathering at the church, at the Mormon Church on Hurstbourne Avenue, Hurstbourne Boulevard. And it'll be our first meeting in 2 years, I guess now. We will not have Zoom for that program. The program will be as this used to be Louisville, presented by Kevin Gibson, talking about many of the aspects of early Louisville. And those of you from Louisville and from Kentucky would be interested in that. And Gene has already reminded you that our seminar is October the 15th. Please mark your calendar for that. And incidentally, we're going to be drawing for door prizes. I don't know why we say door prizes when it's going to be done on Zoom. It is a total Zoom meeting. But if you register, we have dozens of prizes that are going to be announced later on in our publications. The speaker for that is going to be Angie McGahee, I had the privilege of attending a session, week-long session that she coordinated and taught on at the International Program for the International History in Genealogical Research. And she is fantastic. I've been trying to get her here ever since. And so she's finally coming. She has so many titles, it's hard to keep with her as she moves up in genealogy national programs, but her current title is Educational Director for the National Genealogy Society, and also a trustee for the Board of Certification of Genealogies. So she is a very important person in genealogy these days. Well, finally, we're going to get around to our program here, but I've got a couple of announcements about our program. This program is being recorded, but we are asking that if you decide to try to use any of the pictures from the program and from the recording, that you contact our speaker first, because they have people that have donated pictures, family pictures, and they've asked that they not be shared out publicly. So be sure and check with Beth at the museum, Jeffersontown Museum, before you choose to use any of the pictures from her program. There are no handouts for this program, but I do want to remind you, if you have a question or comment, please just take your cursor to the bottom of your screen, and there will come up a line of buttons, and one of the buttons says chat. If you have a question, just click on chat and type in your question. And at the end of Beth's program, we'll look at some of those questions if we have time, and look at 3 or 4 of them and answer it. Well, fine, we're around to you, Beth. We're delighted to have Beth Wilder as our presenter today. Beth is a native of Tennessee, but as a child, her family moved to Fern Creek, where she attended school at the Fern Creek High School. After moving to J-Town, she worked at the library and was asked by the Jefferson Historical Society to manage the Jeffersontown Museum and History Center. The museum is located in the Jefferson Library building, but is a totally separate operation. It is a function of the Jeffersontown Historical Society. Its president is John Ohm. And John's watching now over Beth's shoulder to be sure that we do everything right. John and his wife Donna assist Beth in the operation of the operation. It's a popular place for school classes, as well as for senior groups and adult daycare participants to come and view the history of J-Town. Among the collection are many pictures, documents, relics, large placard explanations regarding the history and people who have lived in the community. The Historical Society and Beth have created and conduct an impressive and informative facility. And thank you, Beth, for coming to share that with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope y'all will bear with me because I'm not accustomed to Zoom meetings. This is really the first one I've ever really had to do. So I guess, well, I also want to mention John Ulmer again. He's sitting here, and if I get screwed up, he's liable to chime in on me. But I guess now I can just hit the share screen so we can show you the slideshow. Okay. Well, right here, hopefully the screen is up all right, and you can see George Rogers Clark. Jeffersontown got its start back in the 1780s when George Rogers Clark and some others were opening the way westward for settlement. Now, most of the land warrants that were used in to purchase land in the area, there were a lot of military warrants, but actually those were all west of the Hurstbourne Lane area. Jeffersontown was not settled with military warrants. This treasury warrant belonged to Edward Tyler. You could see his name right here. And Edward and his 3 brothers settled in the Tucker Station area. And this map right here, if we zoom in on it, you could see Jeffersontown right here, the famous intersection of Taylorsville Road and Watterson Trail. But this number 25 is the area of Tucker Station where all the Tyler brothers had settled, kind of on both sides of the road. This is Edward Tyler's house off Tucker Station. And this is Blackacre, Presley Tyler home, but this was Moses's area. And this was Robert, the brother Robert's house, and it's known as the Old Wilderness Fort. And it's next to the Kroger Shopping Center off Taylorsville Road. This we refer to as the Bruner's town layout. In 1794, Abraham Bruner decided that since the area was already being used as a crossroads, a stopping point for people on their way to Louisville, that he would take advantage of that and build a city there. So what he did was purchase 122 acres from a man named Frederick Geiger, who in turn had purchased it from Peter Shepherd of Shepherdsville. But this 122 acres was on a forested ridge, and it was near Chenoweth Run Creek. So it had a great water source. The land was great there. But this crossroads area was purchased just so that buildings could be put on it, like taverns, blacksmiths, tanners, anything that was needed at the time. And Abraham Bruner himself settled on this corner up here off Main and Market Street. This is our town charter from 1797. I'll zoom up a little bit so you can kind of see how hard these things were to read. We were actually settled on May 3rd, 1797. Well, the town charter was created specifically for Jeffersontown, but it was just right after Middletown was incorporated. Now, Jeffersontown kept its incorporation, and we are technically the longest incorporated town in Jefferson County, because Middletown took their incorporation back. Now, at the time, we were named Jeffersontown for Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was actually the vice president at the time. Adams was president, but most of the settlers in Jeffersontown were Germanic or Scotch-Irish in descent, and their politics apparently differed from Adams. And it's kind of local legend that they named it Jeffersontown actually to spite President Adams. Now, this is an 1818 map of the county, and you could see right here that it's even written as Jefferson or Brunerstown. Because the people were of Germanic descent, they were very proud of their heritage, and they called the area Brunerstown well into the 1900s. This is one of the town boundary stones. In fact, it's the last town boundary stone, I would say the last remaining. We actually have it at the museum now. I had been told not to remove it because it was a viable marker, and I was so afraid that something was going to happen to it, because you could see it's only sticking up about 9 inches in this picture. It eventually got backhoed, so it got knocked out of place. And so that's when the mayor agreed that we could bring it to the museum for safekeeping, since it's the only one we know of. But this was set in 1815 by Valentine Conrad. The town trustees paid him $1.50 to find the rocks for this, to have them cut, and to set them. He got a whole $1.50 for that. Now, this is the Joseph Height log cabin. This is in the area where Mansfield was, which was Henry Watterson's estate. This is another view of the cabin. And it was rumored that this cabin actually had 3 arrowheads embedded in it because there were still Indian attacks at the time. This building is known as the Mittler House. It no longer stands. It was in the area where Good Samaritan Center now is, off of Bluebird Lane, just down Watterson Trail. This is the building as it looked originally. When it was first built, it was from the Lutheran Church. They had built it as a school, and it was known as the Jeffersontown Academy. And not just Lutherans attended it. A lot of the children in the area did attend it. I'm not sure if they had to pay to attend it or not, because not everyone did go to this school. But they were very proud, again, of their Germanic heritage. And one of the favorite things, at the end of the year, they had an exposition, and the children would talk about all their lessons, and they studied hard. I mean, they were into all the sciences and language, all kinds of things. But the very favorite thing was that the children studied German, and at the end of the year, they would recite in German, and it would be standing room only, because all the townspeople loved to come together to listen to the children recite in German. This is another picture of the house in the early 1900s, and this is the Mittler family. Looks like they're maybe having a 4th of July celebration. Now, this is a picture of Catherine Hoke, one of the early settlers, and this is her husband, Adam Hoke. These portraits were, according to what I've heard, painted by John James Audubon. Of course, when he traveled around, he did this to earn actual money when he wasn't painting animals and such that he was so famous for. This is another early settler to Jeffersontown. His name is Dr. William Bryan, and he came from Bloomfield. He was a well-known doctor around town, and in fact, the museum has his spectacles and case on exhibit. When William Bryan came here, he was married to a woman named Margaret, and they had at least one, if not two, small children. Margaret died in the 1834 cholera epidemic. And you can see this is her stone box burial, and one of the ones on the side belonged to at least one, if not both, of her other small children. Now, after she died, Bryan remarried a woman named Anna Liza Hikes. Now, he was very intelligent. Dr. Bryan had actually been using wheat molds like penicillin 100 years before penicillin was even invented. And he also had put a steel plate in a man's head and charged $25 for the service because the man had fallen off the back of a wagon. The man never paid him because he said that was just too much money. But at any rate, Dr. Bryan, because of the 1834 cholera epidemic, he kind of suspected that it was the water. It wasn't well known at the time that water could cause the cholera. And so he took his family and he settled in a higher area of Jeffersontown where he thought it would be safer to drink the water. This is Beachland over in the 6 Mile Lane area. This is the Leatherman log cabin. This is the last really remaining old building that you'll see on the square, the really old one. And it didn't have the logs showing for a long time. Back in the 1970s, a couple had purchased it with the intent of tearing it down really and putting up a glass front drugstore. Now, when they were tearing the siding off of it, they discovered all of these beautiful logs, and you could still see the pig's hair in the chinking that was used. But one of the logs was dated 1826. And a man from Louisville Metro Historic Landmarks Commission actually told me they think the building may be even older than that simply because of the style. Now, this is another old building on the square, and it's old enough just being called the Conrad Seton House because of Dr. Seton who lived in it. But before that, Valentine Conrad, who set the town boundary stones, lived in this building. Now, if you were to go through the front door, toward the back around here is the kitchen area. And that is completely, it encloses the original log cabin that Valentine Conrad lived in. And he had his pottery making business on this site. Now, Corn Island Archaeology occupies this site. And Ann Bader, the archaeologist there, still continues to do excavations on the site when possible. And she has found some of his pottery, including this piece. This is stamped 1809. And it was obviously one of Valentine Conrad's. But this is kind of the pottery that he sold. And he was known for selling his pottery as far south as New Orleans. And for the longest time, Anne said that they looked and looked for pottery made by Valentine Conrad around here, and they just weren't finding it. And they couldn't understand why a Jeffersontown potter was selling all of his pottery down in New Orleans and not here. But Anne has started to find more of his pieces. This is another piece of how his pottery typically looked. She's finding definitely a lot at the various houses that were owned by Conrad and his children, but she's also finding it now in a lot of other Jefferson County sites, which is, it makes her ecstatic. It makes us ecstatic too, to know that his pottery is still out there. This is a pipe that was also found on the Valentine site. This is Soldier's Retreat, which is very near the Genealogical Society. This was owned by Colonel Richard Clout Anderson and his son, Robert Anderson, who was also the commander at Fort Sumter. Robert actually owned a lot for a time on the Jeffersontown Square, which would be kind of in the parking area next to El Nopal. This is William Goose Jr., who was really a best friend of Robert Anderson. Now, he's a son of William Goose Sr., and Goose Sr. may be the namesake for Goose Creek in Jefferson County. It's not 100% certain, but it is thought that it's because of the Goose family settling in that area too. Now, on our town square in Jeffersontown, this is lot number 5. This was the Goose family home and business. They owned a furniture making business that they operated from this place. And of course, it's long since burnt down. But it's also rumored that William Goose Sr. made wagon wheels for Daniel Boone. Don't know exactly the veracity of that story, but it is family lore that he was the only one that could make the wagon wheels to specifications that Boone liked. Now, this is the Blankenbaker house on the town square. It's just down from lot number 5. This one is currently the area where J-Town Beach is now. The Blankenbaker house was owned by Doctors Luther and Leslie, the father and son. Both had their medical business in this house. This is at the museum. It's right outside the front of it's the back of the library building, but the front of the museum entrance. It's the carriage block that was used at the Blankenbaker house. And of course, being that the town square was originally dirt, you can imagine every business really had to have one of these big blocks for people to get up to mount into the carriages, and also to mount horses. It just made it easier to reach them, and it kept them from being in the dirt. Now, Jeffersontown, when it was settled, was primarily a rural area, and it stayed that way really through the 1960s. This is a picture of the Exlin farm, which was down Taylorsville Road, just past the viaduct in Jeffersontown. But this is really what you would see if you were to have come to Jeffersontown. They were very rural for a very long time. This is the Exlin farm again. Jeffersontown was known for onion seed and strawberry cultivation. This is an 1880 map of the town square. And right here, this oval that you see, that marked the site of the Union Church. And actually looking at the map, you see a building right here. That may have been the real site of the Union Church. Now that church served the purpose of housing 4 churches. Once a month, each one of them got to conduct services. It was the Baptists, the Lutherans, Methodists, and Presbyterians that all shared a week of a month in this church. Now, down here, you see the colored Union Church. Now, by this point, obviously, it looks like both of the Black churches had broken off from this. The Black families at the time used to go with their families to the regular churches. And I heard there was an upper story in the old Union Church, and that the Blacks stayed in the upper level of it, and that they watched the services from above. But then obviously they got their own building. Now, as time wore on, everybody gradually moved outside of this church, and this site now is taken over by the First Baptist Church. And this is First Baptist in one of its earlier incarnations. Now, unfortunately, they had a couple of fires, so they lost at least 2 church buildings on this site. And this is the church as it looks today. And across the street from it here, you see the German Reformed Presbyterian Church Cemetery. Now, this was another church. This was not the Presbyterians that shared the Union Church. This was one that was near the Exlin farm, past the viaduct on, well, it's around where Marioneth Road is now, off Taylorsville Road. But it started out there, and then in the early 1800s, they purchased this lot for their church, and obviously they started burying people here. This cemetery is considered to be the 4th oldest in Kentucky, according to Frankfurt. And I'm sure by that they mean the 4th oldest church cemetery, because there are definitely older family plot burials than this. This is another view of that cemetery, but in the background you see the Lutheran Church. Now, the Lutherans were the first ones to move out of the Union Church. They obviously purchased land diagonally across the street from where the Union Church was, and they started their own cemetery behind this building and off to the right. And this building for the longest time was the Lutheran Church, which then moved to 6 Mile Lane, but it also housed the Thoroughbred Chorus. So it was known as Thoroughbred Hall for a very long time. Now, this is the Lutheran Church as it appears today off of Taylorsville Road by 6 Mile Lane. And this is the Presbyterian Church. It moved out next, and it moved Well, it originally moved on to the town square into the Masonic Hall, which I'll show you in a moment. But then when it had funds, it moved to Taylorsville Road and it built this church. And then in the 1960s, it built a larger church right next to it. And unfortunately, the Presbyterian congregation grew so small that the church had to close, and now other churches use this building. Now, this is the Masonic Hall on the town square. Now, the Masonic Lodge still uses the upper floor of this building, but the bottom floor was originally let out to the Presbyterian Church for services. And when they moved to Taylorsville Road, the Baptist Church took over the lower level of this building. Now, ultimately, the Baptist Church got funds and they were able to build a church in the 1920s on Taylorsville Road. But as you could see, this says it was destroyed in the 1937 fire. This is how it looked after the 1937 fire. And you could see the basement of the building still here. Now they must have roofed this over because they continued to conduct their services in the basement of this building until they were able to construct their new church. And this was in 1949. And this is Jeffersontown Methodist Church. And they moved here in in 1860, they were able to build a church on Taylorsville Road, just down from the Baptist Church. And this is St. Paul United Methodist Church. And this is what would be called the colored or the black Methodist Church at the time. And then it was eventually converted into a wedding chapel not that long ago, although I'm afraid that that's gone out of business. This is the Christian church on the town square. This church housed people during the 1937 flood. And it was later, I can't think of the name of it now. It was, well, it's Third Turn Brewing now, but it wasn't the Eagles Lodge. Moose Lodge, yes, thank you. That was the Moose Lodge. Now, across the street, well, diagonally, this was on the corner of Watterson Trail and Taylorsville Road. This is St. Edward Parish. You can see the church, and then the school was back off Taylorsville Road behind this building, or it might actually have been this little building that you see at the corner here. Now, in the Civil War, Jeffersontown was really not pro-Union or Confederacy. You had people from both sides, like the whole state of Kentucky, and nothing really happened in Jeffersontown. Now, this sign talks about the bloody Burbridge executions. This is when General Stephen Burbridge had issued an edict that if any Union soldiers were sniped at, because it was obviously a problem in the county, that they would take 4 Confederate prisoners just arbitrarily. They would just pull them out of prison. They would take them to the site of the sniping and they would shoot them so that everyone could see it happen. Now, the sniping that this was the result of happened really in the Fern Creek area, but Fern Creek was not that populated either. And Jeffersontown wasn't very populated, but it had more people than Fern Creek. So they thought it would be a better place to make an example of the people. This is where that sign used to stand. Now we've got the sign at the museum because this area is getting ready to be made into other things. This is just down from Jeffersontown's police station. And you can see it was a big open field, and they had dug a common burial for the 4 men who were summarily shot. Now, the sad thing about this story, I mean, as if it isn't sad enough, but one of the 4 prisoners that was shot was a preacher. And the people of Jeffersontown and the soldiers that were with him being shot, they did not think it was fair that this preacher should be executed. They told the Union Army, look, we understand, we're soldiers, we're okay with being shot, we get that. But this man is a preacher, he has not done anything wrong, and it is not fair for you to execute him. But they shot him anyway. And so the people in Jeffersontown had a really hard time with that. And later on, the Daughters of the Confederacy put this marker up at the Jeffersontown Cemetery. And you see, obviously, it says martyrs because that's how they viewed these 4 men. Now, 2 of the men were reburied by their families, but the Reverend and the other soldier were taken to the Jeffersontown Cemetery and reburied. So you would see this stone to this day in the Jeffersontown Cemetery. I love this picture. This is the Jeffersontown Cemetery gate, and this is Charlotte Blankenbaker and a few other ladies standing there behind it in the early 1900s. Now, this is an 1880 map of Jeffersontown. And you can see Jeffersontown is starting to grow a little bit here. We've got Market Street, which is Taylorsville Road now, and Main Street, which is now known as Watterson Trail. Now here we've got Old Taylorsville Road. This was where the Union Church was, and this is the colored Union Church. Now this is Old Taylorsville Road right here. So if you were trying to get to Taylorsville in the day, you would have had to come down Taylorsville Road, make a turn on the square, and then come down here to Old Taylorsville Road, because actually the road kind of ended a little bit more right in this area at the bottom of the screen, because the school and other things were down here at the foot of a hill, but then it went on into farm property. Now also the Jeffersontown Cemetery would be located down in this area here, and up in this area was the Jefferson County Poor Farm. Now, this was land that was owned by Jefferson County in particular, but it was considered at the time kind of the middle of the county. So they put the county poor farm here. And when you went through the square, this building here, this two-story one, is the first one that you would see. Now, these other buildings sat in a circle around next to the building, kind of where the Jeffersontown Library is right now. This central part here shows you the interior. This is not a very good picture. This was from the Louisville Courier-Journal a long time ago. So it's not the clearest picture that you could see, but it gives you an idea of what the poor farm looked like. Now, by 1913, they had built a new building because they had wanted to move the poor farm. It had gotten in a very dilapidated state. And the people of Jeffersontown did not want the poor farm moved. They had grown really attached to the people who were living in the poor farm. Most of them were older people. One lady didn't have any sight. There was one man that was kind of considered insane. In fact, there was, according to what I'd read, a little trail he used to walk between the buildings, and that he made a trench because he just walked back and forth all the time. But the people here loved the inmates of the poor farm, and they took care of them. They didn't want to see it leave. And Louisville kept insisting, well, the county insisted that it needed to be moved because they said there wasn't a good water source. Well, Chenoweth Run Creek at the time was clean, and the people here said it was a very good water source. So they decided to build a new building in 1913. This was Colonial Manor. And so then they housed the men and women from the poor farm in this building, or I should say really the white men and women, because they built another one just further down the road on Bluebird Lane, which was called the Colored Poor Farm, and I'll show you that in a moment. This is the building as it exists today. By the 1990s, it had gotten in a very bad state. In fact, the second floor was about to come onto the first floor. And so they had to renovate the entire building. And in order to save the building, Danny Ruckriegel had it made into the Jeffersontown Senior Citizen Center. And I want to remark here, for those of you who don't know, that senior center is a model nationwide. Ruth Frederick took it over in the 1990s. The senior centers had operated out of churches, really. But she took it over and they had moved it to the community center. And then they decided, since the library had been in this in the 1970s, and actually in the 1940s, the county was using it for the Parks and Recreation headquarters. But by the 90s, the senior center took it over. And Ruth made this what it is today. And all senior centers in the nation are modeled on the one that we have here in Jeffersontown because it was such a success, thanks to Ruth Frederick. Now, this is the Colored Poor Farm. It ultimately became the Jeffersontown Police Station before it was torn down to make way for the gyms that are on that road now. But at the time, it had housed the blacks from the poor farm. But nobody stayed in the poor farm that long afterwards. By the 1920s, it had actually kind of gone into disuse, and it sat empty for the longest time. Now, here is another first for Jeffersontown. The building was converted in 1946 to something called Sunshine Lodge. We at the museum have a lot of the children who went to Sunshine Lodge come here. A lot of people refer to it as an orphanage, but it was not an orphanage. What it was it was just at the first time in the nation, an experiment for children who came from homes that were broken, where their parents, the children might have been displaced because their parents had a drinking or a drug problem or something to that effect. But what had happened at the time was children who came from these broken homes got put in juvenile detention centers. And these children were innocent. They had not done anything wrong, but they needed to be looked after. And that was the only place people knew to put them. So in our county, they decided we're going to try this experiment and have a home just for these children. So they renovated the building and made it into Sunshine Lodge. And this is the dedication of Sunshine Lodge in 1946. And for 25 years, it was an important place in the middle of the county. All of the organizations around town, not just Jeffersontown, but all over Jefferson County, provided clothing, food, books, events to take the children to, schooling for the children. This is the back side of the building. This is how we knew it as the police station, that you would enter this off of Bluebird Lane. Let me go back here a moment and let you know that in the 1970s, when they were, Jeffersontown was so proud of this, but the county decided they needed a bigger building for this. So they moved it to downtown Louisville, and Sunshine Lodge became home of the Innocents. So this is a place that got its start in Jeffersontown, and it was the first of its kind in the nation. Now here is another really neat thing for Jeffersontown to lay claim to: the oldest continually active club in Jefferson County. This was the Current Events Club. These are some of the ladies that started it. The Current Events Club was founded in 1906 by some ladies in Jeffersontown who simply wanted to get together to discuss current events. They would have some snacks made and they would either discuss literature of the time or things that were going on at, current events. So it's still going on to this day. This is probably the 25th anniversary when some of the ladies dressed up in costume from early 1900s. And these are the ladies today. Well, actually, this was taken about 10 years ago when they donated a quilt that they made to Jeffersontown to the museum. This photo is the oldest known photo taken in Jeffersontown. It's the Bryan boys. These are the sons of Dr. William Bryan on their way to school. And an itinerant photographer took this photo of them as they were going to school. It was taken right on the town square. And the museum actually has this. It's a photo block that was used for a newspaper article. This is the original Jeffersontown school. Let me bring that up a little bit so you all can see that a little bit better. Typical little school building, but at the time, this picture, you can see 1890 was written on this little postcard. The school was in a dilapidated state. It stood at the end of what was known then as Water Street. And they named these places Water Street for a good reason. And you'll probably find a lot of schools on a Water Street because they always stuck the old school, well, the new schools, on the worst possible piece of land in the town because it was the only one anybody was willing to donate because farmers couldn't use it for anything else. So it was waterlogged, mosquito ridden. There were apparently big rocks and things hampering the way to walk around it. The school was in a dilapidated state by the 1890s. It had been condemned several times, but they kept opening it because there was nowhere else for the children to go to school. Now this man, Edwin Ruth Sproul, also known as E.R. Sproul, wanted to have a new school built in Jeffersontown. E.R. Sproul was one of, in my opinion, one of the greatest men to ever hit Jeffersontown. We couldn't have a mayor back then because we didn't have enough people, but he would have made an excellent mayor. He was so proud of this town. He got his start as an insurance salesman, and so he knew the town like the back of his hand. And in fact, he became a real estate agent. And this is his little real estate book from 1908, trying to get people to come to Jeffersontown that he called the coming suburb. These are a couple of pages from that. He shows the wonderful farmland in Jeffersontown. And then he shows, this is St. Edward up here. And down here, this is a picture of the inner urban, really the town square. It's really a neat little view of the street in Jeffersontown at the time. That's the inner urban. So this is showing you, this is Taylorsville Road right here. But Edwin Ruth Sproul was so proud of this town, and he wanted to get a new school built here, and he tried to get people to invest money so that they could put half the money toward the school, and then the county would put the rest of it toward it. This is H.N. Rubelt. He was another leader in Jeffersontown in the early 1900s. The Jefferson County Bank was started by him, and this is H.N. right here, and you see E.R. Sproul right here with the cashier for the bank. Now, this building still stands next to City Hall on the town square. And this is J.C. Bruce, another big man in Jeffersontown in the early 1900s. He made the Bruce Building, which stood just down from El Nopal. Gaslight Animal Hospital stands next to where this was. This would have been really, I think, on the lot that Robert Anderson might have owned at one time. But now it's a parking lot area. But this, the Gaslight Animal Hospital that stands next to where this stood looks very much like this building does. And you could see down here, the Jeffersonian, that was the first county weekly newspaper in Jefferson County. It started in Jeffersontown in 1907. Now, the second floor of this building that was owned by Bruce was an auditorium. And Bruce was very kind in that he let people use this for all kinds of things. And I don't believe he charged them a penny for it, even though they often would charge people for entrance fees, just so that they could have money for churches and various things that were going on in the town. But it was really a big, important spot in the area at the time. This is Carl Hummel, who eventually took over the Jeffersonian newspaper. It was originally started by J.C. Alcock. But then in 1913, this moved down on the square next to the bank building, and this building still exists. And both of those buildings are right next to Third Turn Brewing. And in fact, I think that Third Turn may actually use these buildings now. This is Henry Watterson, probably the most famous resident to live in Jeffersontown. He was the editor of the Courier Journal and Louisville Times, and he lived off Watterson Trail in Mansfield. And you all may not realize this, but that area of Mansfield was once considered to be a location for the zoo. But the people in Jeffersontown didn't want to have all the animals out this way. So that's kind of a neat thing as far as that goes. But Watterson Trail was named Watterson Trail because it was the driveway Henry Watterson used to get to the town square to get on the interurban. This is a map of the interurban lines, and Jeffersontown was right here in the center. This shows the town square. This is a turnaround, and it says keep right. Now, this is the interurban, and it had no choice but to keep right because that's where the tracks were that you see right here. But I'm assuming cars were the ones that they meant to keep right off of this. And when they did, they probably circled around the square here, meaning keep right so that they didn't turn down the town square going down toward Old Taylorsville Road here. Now, this is a view of the town square, and you see the interurban tracks here in the foreground. Now, right here, you've got Finoli's Grocery. Next to it is a livery stable, because obviously horses were still a big deal in the early part of the century. Back here was, it was a colonial hotel, I believe at the time, and it is now where Jeffersontown Hardware stands. Across the street, you see the Bruce Building. And up here in the foreground, you see the interurban as it's being worked on by men, because there's actually kind of a little ditch-like area here. And unfortunately, a man lost his life. One of the workers fell and hurt his leg somehow, and he died a few weeks after that because of his injuries. These are interurban tokens. And this is Charlotte Blankenbaker and a friend getting on board the interurban. John said the original light rail. Light rail. This is Roscoe Goose, the winner of the 1913 Kentucky Derby. He won with the largest odds in Derby history, which will never be beat because, according to what I've heard, well, they came close Saturday, but the rules have changed, and so they'll never be able to be as big of odds as what he won on Donerail in 1913. Now, this is his brother, Carl Gantz. This is somebody you don't usually hear of. Carl Gantz won the Kentucky Oaks the same year that Roscoe won the Derby. Now, Carl died in an unfortunate racetrack incident. He was trampled, and it was because of Carl's death that Roscoe pushed for all the jockeys to wear helmets at all times. It was because of Carl that this happened. Oh, one thing I want to say before I forget, just in case you all are wondering, his name was Gantz. That was the German pronunciation for goose. So when the Goose family first moved here, they were known as Gantz. And so Roscoe took the name Goose, which the family had been known by for some time. And that's why Carl kept the name Gantz, just so that they could differentiate the two of them. This is a picture of Greg's first edition. This was up near the town square around Maple Road. It was the first subdivision. The second subdivision was Livingston Heights. This took up the area kind of between Grand Avenue and down around the viaduct in Jeffersontown. And this is the next one, known as Jefferson Heights. Jefferson Heights was started by the Jefferson Land Company. This was one of the things that E.R. Sproul belonged to, was the Jefferson Heights Land Company. Now, this is Sproul Road. There used to be these nice little sign markers here as you entered Sproul Road off of Taylorsville Road. And this is the interurban going down Taylorsville Road, going into the Jefferson Heights subdivision area. Now, this was promoted heavily by E.R. Sproul and others because they were selling lots for people to build houses in this subdivision. But E.R. Sproul also wanted that first school to be built here. And consequently, the Jefferson Heights Land Company donated the land for the school to be built. And it's this that ended up being built here in 1914. Originally, it was a grade school for 1 through 8. So there were 8 classes. The 4 of them stayed in this lower level, 4 on the upper level. And then eventually they wanted a high school in here. So by the 1920s, they were building a second story onto this so that they could have the 1st through the 12th grade in here. And this is when they raised the roof so they could have the secondary, well, the high school education in here. Now, it didn't last that long, 25 years. They had the Gents there, J-Town Gents, but they outgrew the space really quickly. The back area of this was littered with all kinds of outbuildings that the high schoolers were on, because by this point, you had to have the bottom areas for gymnasium and other things like that, cafeteria and such. And then you had to have the grade school being taught. And the high school was on the upper floor, but it was just taking up too much of the school. So by 1950, the high school students were sent to Fern Creek and to Eastern. Now, this picture is interesting. This was taken during what was known as the oil boom in Jeffersontown in the 1920s. And you can see here, this is the town pump that the men are holding, and this is a little jar of gasoline. Now, they referred to it as an oil boom. What had happened in the 1920s, people were coming through Jeffersontown in a car, and the cars tended to overheat. And so they would go to the town well, which was not good for drinking water, but it was okay to put water in their radiators or give to horses or what have you. Well, they had opened the well and they noticed it smelled strongly of gasoline. Gasoline is not oil, but they wanted to believe it was oil. Now, a lot of calm people in the town said it's probably leaking from the gas station that was diagonally across the square from the town pump. But other people just did not want to believe that. And they went so far as to start the Jeffersontown Oil Company and sold stock in this. Well, people started coming from all over, buying up land around Jeffersontown or renting property so that they could dynamite it. So oil boom was a really good name for it because they were blasting up the whole town. Now, the town trustees had their fill of it pretty quickly, and they said, this has got to stop. We can't have you all dynamiting the whole town. And so then people looked into it again, and it was proven that diagonally across the street at the Jeffersontown garage, where the gas pumps were, they were actually leaking into the town well. So that quelled the oil boom of the 1920s. Now, this is the livery stable, and the gas station was just down from here on the town square. You can see the town pump over here at the left. And this is the area where King Southern Bank was there for a while. I'm not sure that anything is in the building yet right now, but it's the corner of Watterson Trail and Taylorsville Road. This is Finelli's grocery store, and it also housed the Cumberland Phone Company in Jeffersontown. This is it in the 1921 fire. You can see it just devastated the town because they were frame buildings. You see the interurban tracks going in front of it here. This is more pictures of the devastation from the fire. And there was another fire in 1925 as well. And because of this, they decided, the town fathers said, you've got to start building these things of better stuff than frame. So this house right here, this is a little article talking about Dr. Shacklett's new home being a credit to the community. And you can see the outside building material used is up-to-date tapestry hollow tile, something new in building materials. So this was the first house built in Jeffersontown of this tapestry tile to help prevent fires. And it's still there on the town square to this day. This is just down from City Hall. It's where the Newts and Tudor car lot is. This is the fire department. The building, it was known as the municipal building, was not actually built till 1926. Before that, the fire truck was actually housed across the street at the Jeffersontown garage where the fire started. So they needed a better place to house the fire trucks for sure. And the second story of this was used for town meetings, city council meetings. The library was housed here at various times. And on top here, you could see guns from World War I. This is Jeffersontown's the police department in 1958. It was the first police car that they had gotten, and at the time they had Chief Gene Teague and his assistant Gilbert Hubbard. This is Ida Burden. She is sometimes referred to as the first female mayor of Jeffersontown. That's just not true because Jeffersontown was not eligible to have a mayor when she was on the town council. Now, she was the head of the town council. She was elected as the chairperson of the council by the men that were on the council. And she did a very good job. But it wasn't until 1950 that Jeffersontown had enough residents to even be considered eligible to have a mayor. And it wasn't until 1953 that we actually had a mayor that was elected by the townspeople. And Mayor James Bowles served from 1953 to 1954. He only earned $30 a month as mayor of Jeffersontown. And so he needed to rely on his actual accounting job in order to make a living. And that is why he stepped down in 1954 so that he could go to work full time. This is a picture showing what was supposed to be the logo for the Bluegrass Industrial Park. Now, everyone knows Jeffersontown because of its industrial park. And it wasn't until the industrial park was created that Jeffersontown really took off in the 1960s. Now, here is another first. In the nation, Jeffersontown was the first industrial park to be created, to be designed with a subdivision in mind, so that it wasn't just a bunch of buildings with smoke and soot and all of that coming out. It was supposed to be a very pretty industrial area with a mix of industrial buildings and different businesses and a subdivision built in all along. So it was a very planned industrial park. Now, I'm not sure that this logo ever actually got erected. It was supposed to symbolize a piece of bluegrass, but this is one of the grand openings. I don't think it was the very original opening of the industrial park because it really started in the early 60s. This is a little bit later on when Frank Chambers was mayor of Jeffersontown and they were expanding the industrial park. This is Frank Chambers receiving an award with Jack Durrett. Jack Durrett is another huge figure in Jeffersontown because he started the Jeffersontown Shopping Center with the idea of having a built-in subdivision behind it so it would have built-in people coming to the shopping center. Now, he had already done this in a couple of places. One of them was out around Highview and Preston Highway, where he had set these up. But when he came to Jeffersontown, he decided to move here. And he, in fact, bought Beachland, Dr. Bryan's home off 6 Mile Lane. Now, because of all the work that was being done in the early 60s, Jeffersontown was really establishing itself. And this is a picture of their award. We've got this on display at the museum. It's a big metal sign showing that Jeffersontown was an all Kentucky city, not just in 1968, but also in 69 because of all of the outstanding achievements that it had made at the time. Now, because of this, well, this is a picture right here of the Exlin farm again. This is where the J-Town Shopping Center was. And you can see this is how the J-Town Shopping Center looked for those of you who came out here until probably around the 90s when they really kind of started overhauling it. And now it's called Jeffersontown Commons. But this is a very famous sign that used to be there. The Gaslight Festival. This is really the original sign for the very first Gaslight Festival. People typically want to say it was 1969, but according to all of the contemporary newspaper accounts, it was actually 1970. What was happening was they were having a community fair, and this sign says 5th annual. They had actually been having community fairs all the way back through the late 1800s. And in fact, well, there was the county fair, which the Fairground Road, the fairgrounds were built there for that. And then in Jeffersontown, we would have these community fairs at the school property. Now, this community fair was going on, but they wanted to celebrate all that had been going on in the 60s with Jeffersontown remodeling the town square and everything. They wanted to have some kind of a festival to celebrate this. And so we had the first Gaslight Festival really in 1970. And it was thanks to these two women. The woman on the left is Peggy Weber. She was the daughter of Fred Weber, who actually thought up the industrial park idea. He was a realtor who bought up a bunch of the land specifically so that they could put it toward being an industrial park. Now, the woman on the right is Petra Williams. She was a best friend of Peggy Weber, and they hung out together. They loved to go antiquing. And one day when they were at an antique store in Jeffersontown, they came across a gas light that had been just recently found under the steps of a church in Jeffersontown. And the church sold it or gave it to this antique dealer. Well, the antique dealer sold it to them, and they came up with the idea that they thought we should make reproductions and line the town square with these gas lights. Ozzy Ostringer set to work on reproducing all of the gas lights. The one in the foreground is the original that was found under the church steps. And then these others were modeled after it, and they were lining the town square at the time. This is the look that it had back then. City Hall looks a little different because now you'll know there's steps coming down. They've lowered the street since then, because this right here is on level with the street, and you see the gas lights lining it. And at the time, Jeffersontown was trying to get an overall look of kind of a colonial feel. They wanted all the facades to kind of look like you would have seen in the days of Thomas Jefferson. This is one of the early Gaslight Festival pictures. I love this little girl on her dad's shoulders. She's got sponge curlers in her hair. It's one of my favorite pictures of Jeffersontown. This is another picture of the square during the 1972 Gaslight Festival when it was held on the square. The first Gaslight Festival was in fact held down at the Jeffersontown Shopping Center because Mayor Chambers was so proud of the town square. He didn't want it messed up by a bunch of people coming up to celebrate it there. So they actually started the parade at the City Hall at the time and went down to the shopping center where the festival was being held. Now it's the reverse. You start the parade at the shopping center and it ends at Jeffersontown City Hall. And this is the Gaslight Festival today. All of these people that come to Jeffersontown, and that is what we're known for. This is a picture of the Jeffersontown Water Tower as it was being taken down in 1975. You can see this is the corner of Taylorsville Road and Watterson Trail. Blue Motor Coach is right here. The bus had taken over from the interurban at that point. And then we've got the big water tower here. And this is another picture of the water tower coming down. This is another picture again of the town square where you see the interurban and everything, but this is the same view. Well, this actually would have been taken in the middle of Watterson Trail. This was taken at the side because you wouldn't want to stand in the middle of Watterson Trail now, but this is the same view. Very interesting view here to show you the difference in how it looks now. This is the Veterans Park in Jeffersontown. This is the Freedom Wall, very beautiful area. This is a close-up. If you've not been there to Veterans Park off Taylorsville Road, you really ought to see this Freedom Wall. And this is the park that's right at the Freedom Wall where children can play. It's handicap accessible. And this is the Louisville Orchestra inside the Jeffersonian, which is our community center. We get all kinds of good groupings and such here to do things. This is a mural that somebody had designed. We never actually put it up, but I love this mural. It was done by Casey McKinney. It shows the new signs that go at the ends of Taylorsville Road. It's got Chenoweth Run Creek Bridge right here. You see City Hall and some of the old buildings and the balloons from the Gaslight Festival. Our park, the new, this is the gas lights that are on the very center of the town square. It really shows a good overview of Jeffersontown, in my opinion. And that's the end of our presentation right here, just to show you Jeffersontown and all it has to offer. It's a great place to live, work, and play. And we hope that you will come visit us and come see us at the museum. And I'm done now. If anybody would like to have any questions.
Thank you very much. I don't think we've had any questions submitted, but I do have a question, Beth. Has the Historical Society and the Archives building there, have you provided any process for people to file? You mentioned so many names that sound kind of familiar. I'm sure there are people that wonder if they are kin to some of these folks that you have mentioned. Do you have a process for filing family histories or family charts?
We actually do have things here at the museum. We don't have anything where I'm sure it's not anywhere near as accessible as the things you all are used to dealing with. I mean, people are always welcome to come to the museum. We're open Monday through Friday, 10 to 5. Now we've got the paperwork here in the museum for anybody that has been mentioned in newspaper accounts, books, and such. We've got different genealogical files. And in fact, that's what Donna Ulmer is working on for the most part, is trying to get that together. So we've got it both in a paper file and on the computer as well. Now, when people come in, it's probably easiest for them to tell me who they're wanting information on. I can pull those files and they're welcome to sit through and look through them. If they've got, well, if they would like, I could put things on a computer disk from our files so they could take it home on a computer disk. Or if somebody would like to bring a flash drive that is unopened, a brand new one, because we can't just put any old flash drive on our computers because we're all attached to City Hall. We can't take a chance on viruses. But if they wanted to bring a thumb drive that is unopened and they would like us to download the files we've got, I have no problem doing that for people. They just can't use things without our permission. If they wanted to publish something, they can't do that kind of thing with them, but they're free to take any files we could put on there and they can take them home and peruse them if it's easier. Or as I said, they could come to the museum and look through our files. I'd be glad to find any and all information possible that we can for them. They could either call ahead. Our number is 502-261-8290. And I can try and locate information for them. They could email me at bwilder@jeffersontownky.gov, and I would be glad to find whatever they need. Or they could just simply come in here and let us know. While we're open, we'd be glad to look for whatever we could.
Another question came up with someone, Carol Whitledge is asking, do you have any idea where Abraham Bruner came from? Some Bruners came out of Maryland, the writer says.
That's a good question. I don't know that right off. That's something I would have to look up because I know he moved to Indiana. A lot of the people from Jeffersontown would come through here and then they would move up to Indiana afterwards, and they seem to settle there in Indiana. But I don't know where he originally came from. The vast majority of people in Jeffersontown came from Pennsylvania, but I couldn't swear that all of them did by any means.
Another comment, thank you for an interesting, this is Linda Vollmer, says, thank you for an interesting presentation. A name or two in my family tree. It's good to hear about them. Betty Graham is asking, is there a book about the people and places that you've been talking about?
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. If people got on the City of Jeffersontown website, if you just typed in Jeffersontown on your computer, Jeffersontown, Kentucky, you will pull up the Jeffersontown City website. And on it, at the very top, it says departments. And if you go to that and then scroll down, you'll see museum. And on there, we have got something that off to the left-hand side of the screen, it would say historic documents. We have got Colonel Jobson's book on there. It was wonderful. Betty Jobson allowed us to scan it. So it's in 2 parts, but you can peruse that online. And then there's also Joellen Johnston's wonderful book on the first 200 years of Jeffersontown. And that's online as well. And there are a couple of other little things like, I think the Lutheran Church record might be on there. I don't remember if First Baptist is on there, but you would see them when you got onto the website. But those are available online for people to look through. And the unfortunate thing is they're not available to buy anymore unless you could find one on eBay or Amazon or something like that. And they're kind of expensive, but they're well worth it if you wanted one.
Dave has asked, would you please repeat your phone number slowly?
Sure. It's 502-261-8290.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic presentation, Beth, and really informative and enlightening about. I live in the suburbs of Jeffersontown, right here on Hurstbourne Avenue, and so I'm delighted to find out about the town that I now am part of. Thank you so much. It was a great program.
Well, thank y'all for having us.
And we, of course, are looking forward, some of us looking forward to visiting with you and seeing those displays and relics and signs and placards you have about information that covers a lot of the stuff you've talked about today. We're very grateful for your appearance today. And thank you, John, for being in the background there to help us.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Beth.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say how grateful I am for John and Donna, too. They do so much to help us.
This concludes our program. You remember the other programs we have coming up. The next program, of course, is Bring Out the Dead, about plagues, pandemics, and epidemics, and its effect on ancestry. And then our program, the First Wave Germans, our German interest group, which is on Tuesday, June the 7th. And put on your calendar October the 15th for our fall seminar. Appreciate those of you who are with us today. Do we have a total number of people that attended? Anybody count that? Okay.
I saw 30 at one time.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. This concludes our program. Thank you for and join us for our future programs. Especially thanks to you, Beth. Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.